Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death killed between 75 and 200 million people. That's up to half the population of Europe, dead in 4 years. No war, no famine, no natural disaster in human history has ever killed a higher percentage of the world's population. And it changed everything. We're covering where the plague came from, how it spread across the known world, what it actually did to the human body, how people responded, including by blaming the Jews and flagellating themselves in public, and why the Black Death accidentally made life better for the people who survived it. Stay with me. The Black Death didn't start in Europe. It started on the Silk Road and arrived by ship. The plague originated in Central Asia, probably in the 1340s, carried by fleas living on black rats. The bacterium, Yersinia pestis, had been simmering in rodent populations for decades before it exploded. The Mongol trade routes that connected China to Europe, which had brought silk and spices west, now carried something far more dangerous. The outbreak reached Crimea in 1346, where Mongol forces were besieging the Genoese trading port of Kaffa. In one of history's first acts of biological warfare, the Mongols catapulted plague-infected corpses over the city walls. The Genoese fled by ship, carrying the plague with them. By October 1347, 12 Genoese ships docked at Messina in Sicily. Most of the sailors were dead. The living were covered in black swellings oozing blood and pus. Sicilian authorities ordered the ships out of the harbor immediately. It was too late. The Black Death entered Europe through one port on 12 ships in October 1347. Within 4 years, it had killed half the continent. The Black Death came in 3 forms. All of them were horrifying. 2 of them were nearly always fatal. Bubonic plague, the most common form, was spread by flea bites. The bacteria traveled to the nearest lymph node, which swelled into a bubo, a painful black lump the size of an egg, sometimes an apple, appearing in the groin, armpit, or neck. Fever, chills, vomiting, and delirium followed. About 30 to 60% of bubonic plague victims died, usually within a week. Septicemic plague occurred when the bacteria entered the bloodstream directly. Internal bleeding caused black patches to appear under the skin, giving the disease its name. This form was almost always fatal, often within hours. Victims could go to bed healthy and be dead by morning. Pneumonic plague, the most terrifying, spread through the air when victims coughed. It infected the lungs. It was almost 100% fatal, and it spread person to person without any flea or rat required. Medieval medicine had no answer. Doctors wore beak-shaped masks stuffed with herbs, believing the plague was spread by bad air. They were wrong about the mechanism, but the masks may have accidentally provided some protection. The Black Death was 3 diseases in one, each more lethal than the last, spreading faster than any medieval society could track or contain. When medicine fails and God seems silent, people do desperate things. The Black Death produced some of the darkest human behavior in history. The Catholic Church had no explanation and no cure. When prayer failed, people looked for someone to blame. Jewish communities across Europe were accused of poisoning wells. Entire Jewish populations were massacred in cities across Germany, France, and Spain. Thousands killed in pogroms before the plague even reached their towns. The flagellant movement swept Europe. Groups of men traveling from town to town, publicly whipping themselves bloody to atone for humanity's sins and appease God. Pope Clement VI eventually condemned them, and they faded. Some cities tried quarantine. Venice introduced the first formal quarantine in 1347, requiring ships to anchor offshore for 40 days before docking. The Italian word for 40 days, quarantino, is where we get the word quarantine. The Black Death revealed the limits of medieval society's institutions, the church, medicine, government, all at once. None of them had answers, and in that vacuum, fear took over. In Florence, the population dropped from 100,000 to 50,000 in 18 months. In some villages, the death toll was total. Entire settlements were abandoned, ghost villages whose outlines can still be seen from the air today. In Paris, 800 people were dying per day at the peak. Ships were found drifting at sea with no living crew. The city ran out of consecrated ground and began burying the dead in mass graves outside the city walls. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it killed institutions, communities, and the medieval world's sense that God was watching over them. The psychological damage lasted generations. Here's the dark paradox of the Black Death. For the people who survived, life got better. With half the labour force dead, workers suddenly had leverage they'd never had before. Serfs found that lords were desperate for workers and willing to pay. Wages rose. Serfdom began to collapse across Western Europe. The feudal system, which had dominated European society for centuries, never fully recovered. Art changed. The danse macabre, the dance of death, depicted death as a skeleton, leading people of all classes to their graves equally. That imagery fed directly into the Renaissance's obsession with humanism and the individual. The Church's failure to explain or stop the plague permanently damaged its authority. Some historians argue the Black Death was a necessary precondition for the Renaissance and the Reformation, that the old world had to be shattered before a new one could be built. The Black Death killed half of Europe, and in doing so, it broke the medieval world open and let the modern world in. 75 to 200 million dead, half of Europe in 4 years. 3 forms of plague, 12 ships, 1 port in Sicily. Mass graves, ghost villages, and a church that had no answers. And from the wreckage, higher wages, individual rights, the Renaissance, and the modern world. History's deadliest pandemic didn't just end lives, it ended an era. If you want more stories like this, click the card above for our breakdown of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, animated in Lego. See you there.